All right, let's just jump right in. We are talking about a crisis that's unfolding right now in March of 2026. Yeah, it's an oil shock, but it's nothing like what we've seen in decades. The conversation among analysts has totally shifted. It's not if oil will hit $150 a barrel anymore, it's when it's going to blow past 175. So that's what we're going to unpack today. First, how we could actually get to $175 oil, and second, what on earth happens to the rest of us when it does.
So, right off the bat, you've got to understand that this crisis is not, I repeat, not a replay of the last huge price spike back in 2008. When oil hit $147 then, the whole global economy was already falling apart because of the banking meltdown. This time, the energy supply itself is what's cracking first, and the reason why is totally different. And honestly, it's way more dangerous.
Okay, so what's the big difference? It's really simple. The 2008 shock was all about speculation. It was hedge funds, paper trades, a crisis on Wall Street that ended up spilling over and hitting the oil markets. But now, in 2026, it's the complete opposite. We're facing a crisis of actual physical shortages. We're not talking about bets on a screen. We're talking about a real-world blockade. We're talking about real tankers full of real oil that literally cannot get from point A to point B.
And believe it or not, this entire global crisis boils down to just one number: 21 miles. That's it. That's the width of the Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest point. This tiny, tiny bottleneck where a fifth of all the oil the world uses every single day has to pass through. And right now, that choke point is basically closed for business. Hundreds of tankers are just sitting there, dead in the water, and the global economy is just... So how in the world do we get from one blocked strait to the price of oil absolutely skyrocketing to $175 a barrel? Well, it's not just one thing. It's more like a domino effect. 4 huge pressures all piling on top of each other at the exact same time. Let's walk through them one by one. You can almost think of them as the 4 horsemen of this oil shock. First, you've got the blockade itself, which just stops the flow of oil cold. Second, that triggers a chain reaction of production shutdowns all through the Gulf because there's nowhere to store the oil. Third, you've got the physical destruction of pipelines and refineries from attacks. And fourth, our emergency supplies, our safety net. They're running on empty.
And look, I want to be really clear here. That 175 number, it's not some crazy figure we're just pulling out of thin air. It is the middle ground of what the world's top energy analysts are forecasting. Goldman Sachs says a long disruption pushes prices way past 120. And as you can see right here, Wood Mackenzie, a firm that's highly, highly respected, says 150 is basically a done deal. And even $200 isn't impossible. This is what serious, data-driven analysis looks like.
Okay, so that brings us to the second driver, this chain reaction of shutdowns. Because the tankers can't leave the Gulf, all the storage tanks in places like Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE, they're filling up, they're overflowing, and once that happens, you have no choice but to turn off the wells. The International Energy Agency is projecting this will rip 8 million barrels of oil a day out of the market. Let me put that in perspective for you. The famous 1973 Arab oil embargo that sent the world into a recession, that was a disruption of only 4 million barrels a day. What we're looking at is double that. Double. And that leads us straight into our third point, which is maybe the scariest part. We're not just talking about a temporary blockage anymore. We're talking about permanent damage. Airstrikes have hammered refineries and gas fields in Iran, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. I mean, these are incredibly complex facilities. You don't just flip a switch to turn them back on. We're talking months, maybe even years of repairs. So you see, some of this supply isn't just stuck in traffic. It's gone, wiped off the map. Which brings us to the fourth and final driver of this whole mess. Our safety net is basically gone. Governments all around the world got together and did the biggest release from their emergency reserves ever, 400 million barrels. Now, that sounds like a ton of oil, right? But let's look at the numbers. The world burns through about 105 million barrels every single day. That massive once-in-a-generation release, it covers less than 4 days of what the world uses. 4 days. After that's gone, we have no cushion. We are totally exposed. All right, so that's how we get to $175 oil. But now for the big question. What does a world like that actually look like? What does it feel like for regular people, for businesses, for governments? Well, Oxford Economics called $140 a barrel the breaking point for the world economy. And we are on a fast track to completely shatter it. Okay, for anyone living in the US, this is where it hits home. Literally. There's a really simple rule of thumb. For every $10 jump in the price of a barrel of crude oil, the price of a gallon of gas goes up about 25 cents. So you do the math. A $100 price shock, that's the difference between where prices were and $1.75, means you are paying an extra $2.50 a gallon every single time you fill up. That's not just an annoyance, that fundamentally changes people's lives. It guts household budgets and grinds travel to a halt.
But here's the thing. It's not just about the gas pump. This kind of price shock acts like a virus that infects the entire economy. Think about it. Diesel for trucks, jet fuel for planes, fertilizer to grow food, plastics for everything we buy, it all gets way more expensive. And what you get is this absolutely toxic cocktail of rising prices, inflation, and a slowing economy at the same time. There's a word for it, stagflation. It is the economic nightmare scenario that keeps central bankers up at night because all their usual tools just stop working. And look, if this whole situation is painful for a wealthy country like the United States, for the developing world, it is an absolute catastrophe. Countries like Pakistan and Sri Lanka, they import almost all of their energy. Their national budgets just explode. In places like Egypt and Bangladesh, the government has to spend a fortune on fuel subsidies just to keep the lights on and prevent riots. At $1.75 a barrel, that becomes impossible. And that means you're looking at blackouts, food shortages, huge protests, and even the risk of complete economic collapse.
And this is where things get really weird. It's a huge paradox. You'd assume the oil-producing countries in the Gulf are just rolling in cash right now, right? Wrong. Their entire governments, their whole economies are funded by selling oil. But with their ports blocked and their facilities damaged, they can't actually get the oil out to sell it. So get this, they're losing massive amounts of money at the exact moment prices have never been higher. It's creating a whole separate crisis inside their own borders.
So you might be asking, well, what about the people whose job it is to fix this, like the US Federal Reserve? The short answer is they're trapped. They're in an impossible position. Their main tool for fighting inflation is to raise interest rates to cool down the economy. But raising interest rates can't drill for oil. It can't unblock a strait. All it would do is slam the brakes on economic growth, making the stagnation part of stagflation even worse. They have to choose between letting inflation run wild or causing a devastating recession. There are no good options. You know, there's one last really dark irony in all of this. Long term, yeah, a crisis like this is probably going to light a fire under the transition to renewables and EVs. Nobody wants to be this vulnerable ever again. But in the short term, oh, it does the complete opposite. When you're facing a desperate shortage, you start worrying about green and start worrying about survival. It's about energy security above all else. And that means firing up old coal plants. It means drilling for shale oil like crazy, basically burning anything and everything you can get your hands on, just to keep the lights on. So when you step back and look at all the pieces on the board, the blockade, the economic chaos, the impossible decisions facing leaders, a totally new picture starts to form. What we're seeing isn't just a military conflict that happens to have some economic consequences. It's something much deeper. We have to start thinking about this differently. Because when you really connect all the dots, the inflation hitting your wallet, the recession that's looming, the risk of chaos in countries around the world, it all traces back, all of it. It all comes back to one simple physical place. The entire front line of this global economic battle runs through a single strait of water that's just 21 miles wide. You see, in the end, this was never just about missiles or borders. This is an energy war. And the weapons aren't just bombs. They're blockades and infrastructure strikes. And as that price keeps climbing toward $175, it's become crystal clear that the world economy isn't just watching from the sidelines. It is right there on the front line.